looking to get you a shirt. Can't find them right now on Amazon or on Groupon, but I'm going to.
I'm not laying awake.
Good morning. We'll go ahead and come to order. Counting around, I think we do have a quorum, and we'll go ahead and start with the meeting and introductions. Andy Pico, Colorado Springs.
Mark Waller, El Paso County.
Mark Andrews with CDOT filling in for Karen Rowe.
Neil Levy, Woodland Park.
Jeff Kaiser, Monument.
Rod Chisholm, Deputy Garrison Commander, Fort Carson.
Dick Elsner, Park County.
Good morning, Pat Carley, Air Force Academy, 10th Air Base Wing Vice Commander.
Todd Moore, Commander, Peterson Air Force Base.
Terry Storm, Military Affairs Council.
Jay Rohr, Manitou Springs.
Sharon Thompson, Fountain.
Good morning, Jill Gabler, Colorado Springs.
And good morning, Norm Steen, Teller County.
Okay. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Any comments, changes?
To approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Public comments for topics not on the agenda? Anyone in the public? Okay, seeing none. Consent items. I do have one item to highlight in the consent. One late addition was the addition of two nominees to the CAC appointed by the Colorado Springs City Council last night, or yesterday afternoon, I should say. So with that, we have any questions or comments on the consent items?
Move to approve the consent calendar?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Racing through. Action items. 5A, Long-Range Transportation Plan, Objectives and Targets.
Good morning, Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner with PPACG. Today I'm going to be going over the objectives and the targets for the 2045 Long-Range Transportation Plan. If you recall, back in May, the Board of Directors approved 5 high-level visionary goals for the long-range plan, and right now we are currently in the process of establishing the branches of those goals, which we're calling the objectives, and also the branches of those objectives, which we're referring to as the targets. The objectives ask what do we want to achieve, and the targets ask by how much. So we've met with the TAC 4 times over the past couple months, and at our first meeting, we all kind of decided that in order to establish meaningful objectives, they need to be measurable. And we also need to make sure that we actually have the data to measure them. So we decided that kind of up front with the TAC, and we kind of had that mindset going into the objectives discussion. And with that, we knew that if we could make them measurable, then that would ultimately lead to meaningful targets in the end. So again, we had several long discussions with the TAC on what the language of the objectives should be. We had several objectives that we discussed for 2 to 3 hours just to kind of work through what it should say. But PPACG staff feels that after those discussions, the TAC really was able to address the different priorities of all the different entities in our region, and they came up with a solid list of objectives. After we got that list established, PPACG staff aggressively asked the TAC to come up with the targets that go with each of those objectives, and then we held a special TAC meeting to get a recommendation on both the objectives and the targets. From there, we took that recommendation to the CAC last month, and the CAC pointed out that several of the objectives were lacking targets, and that was a mistake on PPACG's end and on the TAC's end. We completely overlooked putting targets with some of the objectives. Again, we were so involved with trying to get everyone on the same page with the language for the objectives that there were several targets that we overlooked. So with the CAC, we decided to take a step back and just focus on developing a list of objectives and then come back to the targets next month. So we decided to hold a special CAC meeting to have that discussion. And the TAC, at that meeting, they kind of analyzed the list of objectives that the TAC had come up with. They made a few minor tweaks to the wording. They did not change anything significant about the objectives. And in PPACG staff's opinion, they actually improved upon the objectives that the TAC had come up with. We had 2 TAC members at that meeting, and I think that they would probably agree with that as well. So the CAC recommended those objectives at that special CAC meeting. So in your packet, you'll notice you have 2 recommendations. You have one from the TAC, which is recommending the objectives and the targets, and then you have one from the CAC and from PPACG staff, which is just recommending the objectives. Again, I would emphasize that we just get through the objectives this month. We're currently in the process of scheduling a joint TAC and CAC workshop, so we can all come together and start working on the targets. But before we do that, we need to get through the objectives. So that's kind of why there's two different recommendations on your list for this month. So with that, that's kind of everything that we've done so far with the objectives and the targets. So answer any questions that you might have on that.
One question, just to confirm here, the TAC didn't have a change in objectives. Did they have a difference of opinion on what the objectives were?
From what the CAC had developed?
From what the CAC and the staff recommended?
So what happened was we had this special CAC meeting last week.
Right.
So the TAC has not met since that meeting. But what I did after that special CAC meeting was I sent out what the CAC had recommended to the TAC via email, and I just said if there's any comments or any concerns, please let me know. And we didn't hear back from anybody. But we did have 2 TAC members at that special CAC meeting, and I think they're here today if they want to speak on behalf of the TAC. But they were, from what I understood, they were very happy with what the CAC had come up with. So hopefully that answers your question.
Not quite, but let me open up the questions. Any questions from the board? Yes.
Sorry I missed the meeting last Friday, the staff meeting, work session, but have these objectives been evaluated against CDOT's objectives? Are they consistent with what CDOT on a regional and statewide level want to accomplish?
Well, the one objective that is going to be very consistent with CDOT is the one for safety. They are required by the Federal Highway Administration to come up with a safety objective and a safety target. They have not come out with that yet. So what we're recommending in this list is to basically be consistent with them once they do come out with that. But we don't have a specific target there yet, just because CDOT hasn't come up with it.
I'm not suggesting we should align ours with theirs, but
Yeah.
if they were contrary, we have a problem. So.
Yeah, I don't think we'll have that issue, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Could we have a recommended, we have a recommendation for approval. Do I have a motion? One or the other, or deferred?
Sorry, I was having iPad problems trying to struggle with that. We're only voting on the objectives and not the targets. Is that correct?
That's correct, and just the objectives that were recommended by the CAC.
That's the proposed motion from staff,
Yes.
which leads to further work, obviously, but
Yeah, and then we're going to have that special TAC and CAC workshop in the next week to get those targets established.
yeah. And looking at the high-level objectives, I think they are aligned. I didn't see any that were actually, different, which was actually my focus. Was there any disagreement about what those objectives are, even though that they're listed the same? But I'm hearing that there is not.
No, they just tweaked a couple words and made some of the objectives a little more specific, but they didn't change any of the fundamental meaning of what the objectives were trying to accomplish.
Okay. Mr. Vituli?
Good morning. Brian Vituli with the City of Colorado Springs Mountain Metro Transit. And I'm also the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee. Yeah, as Kevin said, we met numerous times over the last couple months, and we are fairly comfortable with CAC's and staff's recommendation. And as Kevin said, they are, they're not inconsequential word tweaks, but we think that they do add some benefit to them. So we recommend approval of what's in attachment 2. That's the PPACG staff and CAC recommendation.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah.
We have it. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
Mark Waller, El Paso County, Yolanda. I'm fine making the motion here, and I think these objectives are okay. What I am sort of struggling with here a little bit, and maybe it needs to be this way, and I'd appreciate some feedback. I think the objectives are a little bit nebulous, and I think can have different meaning to different people. Maintain or improve current roadway infrastructure condition. Well, maybe that means something different to me than it does to Councilman Pico, and so I'm trying to understand what was the thought process behind having these be so high level.
This is a great question, and I think your question will be answered a little bit better next month once we get to the targets, because we're going to answer that question by specifying how those things are going to be measured. So for that example you gave, improve or maintain roadway condition, so we're going to be measuring that based on a thing called the International Roughness Index, and that'll kind of be the way that it's going to be actually analyzed, and then we're going to use that to kind of slide into what the target's going to be for it. At this point it's very high level, but once we get down to how it's actually going to be measured, that's going to start being a little bit more specific. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Okay.
Sure.
So maybe to kind of follow on is, any statement of objectives or priorities also assumes that something else is not a priority. That something that's not an objective or not a goal is a lower priority. What happens when something has apparently this board decides that a particular project benefits a constituency or a route or safety, but it's not an objective? Is that automatically set aside, or is it does the board have the ability to select a project even though it wouldn't meet a specific objective or target?
Well, the board can certainly always.
How are the objectives used, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a hierarchy. So the top you have those goals that were approved, and now we're branching down into the objectives, which is going to get a little bit more specific. And we're going to show that when we start showing how we're going to measure them, and then from there we're going to have targets, which shows kind of exactly at what level we want to achieve that objective, and then from there go one level deeper. We're getting into the scoring criteria. We're going to use that to score the projects. Okay. But the board can always make change its priorities if that's necessary.
If I'm not mistaken, we had 13 priorities that were used for scoring currently. Does this change that scoring, the criteria? We had most 13 priorities to these. I haven't counted them. How many we have here?
You're saying we have 13 in the 2040 plan, the current plan that's been approved?
Yes, is that correct?
I think that's 13. Yeah.
9 federal plus 4 of our own, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't counted how many we have here. At least.
Yeah. But these criteria, if we approve the objectives here, become the scoring metric, the baseline from which, or the target we provide a score to particular projects. Is that?
It can certainly be the baseline, and we haven't gotten to this discussion yet with the TAC or the CAC, but just because it's an objective, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll actually have that be a scoring criteria. It just depends on what the TAC and the CAC kind of come up with from there, but it'll certainly be a target, and then from there we'll decide if it's going to be a scoring criteria.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about Goal 3, Objective 3. Goal 3 is talking about, I'm sorry, this is Sharon from Fountain, connectivity and accessibility, and the goal is ensure adequate and equitable access to destinations using a variety of modes. And Objective 3, modal integration, enhance model connections and improve existing ADA accessibility. I'm glad we want to improve the existing ADA facility, but shouldn't part of the goal be to also, you'll want to help me out here if you want to, feel free to, but to also expand some of the needs of the ADA in the community. There's obviously gaps and places people trying to get transportation and things. I think if we're only going to work on improving the existing what we have, are we really really working on the problem. I'm not saying that doesn't need to be improved also.
That's a great question. We had this brought up in the CAC as well. The reason we said existing is because all future projects that are going to be built with PPACG funds, they have to be by definition ADA compliant. So we found that it was not necessary to address new projects since it's already built into what the project has to be. Does that make sense?
Go ahead.
Maybe that could be stated that
Okay.
that these will be built into the projects.
Okay, so you would like some sort of a caveat on that objective, just specifying that future projects are going to be ADA compliant, just based on the federal rules and everything?
Yeah, ADA compliant or more. Sometimes we just go to compliance. Like an example of that are the ramps. They're ADA compliant, but they're sand catchers. And so a lot of times they're just completely ineffective. And, so it's like making them not just to be ADA compliant, but to really be effective.
Okay.
Just go that extra step.
Yeah. Yeah, the new ramps with the bumps on them, if you've ever tried to do them in a scooter or on crutches like I had to do last fall, they're not safe. And then, like she said, the ones with the lines in them, they catch the sand and the ice, and I don't know what the answer is to that, but those bump ones are horrible.
So I will make a note here and add some language that says we want future projects to not only be ADA compliant, but we also want them to. Can you repeat what kind of word you would use for that?
To be effective or to really do what it was meant to do, to make it accessible. So we say it's ADA compliant, but in truth, it's not even accessible still when all these ramps are sand catchers. And so they will pass for being ADA compliant when indeed they're not.
Okay.
I mean, they are compliant legally, but in reality, in using them, it doesn't. The use. I'm sorry. I'm just not.
Maybe just not be ADA compliant, but looked at with specificities to each project. So maybe the bump ramp would work here, but the one with the slits in it would work there. You know, it just is going to depend on where it's at and what it's doing. So
It's not so much the bump ramp. It's just.
I'm just using that as an example because
Yeah,
I think most people are familiar with it.
I went. I did a tour in my area with Ryan Fitz, and he was saying it's because of the ADA rules that they have to install them in such a manner, and that they were allowed to install it the way they would do it. These ramps would not be sand catchers.
That's interesting. Is that because of the, dumb question, but is that because of the way the ADA law is written?
I don't know. It didn't make sense to me. I was like, it kind of defeats the whole purpose. It's almost like just in name only. Okay, we're being ADA compliant. And it's in reality, it's not really accessible.
Well, in looking at the project in terms of I have to push my mom in a wheelchair a lot now. And you get to an ADA ramp and you're all excited, but there's two on the corner and you don't want to use them. You want to go around the corner. So now you're like falling out of the wheelchair as you go around the corner. Just, because the ramps are so intrusive into the sidewalk, there isn't enough space to get around. So that would be something that could be looked at per project, so.
Well, if I may make a suggestion, I think there's going to be some follow-on here to add some specificity to this, so.
Right. Well, I think the concern
we
was
can approve the top
existing.
level.
Yeah.
But we can approve the top level and then kind of expand on this as they fall.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Mr.
Yeah.
Moore?
Good morning, Jim Moore, Chairman of the CAC. I think the important thing to keep in mind here from our conversations in the Citizens Advisory Committee is that we felt it was critical that there be measurable items, that when you drill down, you're actually looking at measurable items. As Kevin has said, with regard to the ADA, the dilemma that I think the builders have and that we have is that if you do something that you think is an improvement and it's not compliant with the ADA regulations, it may endanger the certification for the structure. So when we're dealing with that, we've got to keep that kind of thing in mind. It's one of the reasons why some of the language changes that we recommend came about was to, instead of just saying, for example, in the initial recommendation on part of the safety, was to add safety features to increase safety. A little redundant, but that's all right. The problem with some of that is sometimes you can add, quote, safety features that have no impact whatsoever because there's some other factor that's involved in creating the hazard. So we felt that we needed to really dig down into that, and that's one of the reasons why stepping back to the objectives we felt was the right way to go. And to Commissioner Waller's comment, the interesting thing that we encountered in our conversation was some of the initial objectives, there's no database. Nobody quite knows how to measure it. So the question becomes, what is the objective then for us? And how can we put something out there so that staff can work to that goal and then come back and report to the committees and to you all as to what's going on? So that was what we were all about, and we're very comfortable, and I think appreciate the support from the TAC on the language that evolved out of last week.
Okay, Trustee Smith.
If this was referred, if this was referred back to staff as opposed to accepting one of the two things, would that be a step backwards? Is that would that be a total? I would just like comments on that.
Okay.
I'm not going to stop it for that. I just want to bring that up, and maybe that can be something that you, when you get down to more of the, not the objectives, the targets. Yeah, thank you. Get down to the targets. I just wanted to bring that up, that it was a concern that we were only going to work on existing, but you've explained it really well, so I'm comfortable with moving forward with it. I believe at Friday they said this is just trying to keep moving on the deadline for the program, for the project.
Yeah, this is a step in the process, so I think if we approve, as recommended, the attachment 2, that is approving their objectives in the top level, and then we'll continue to work to increase the specificity. So, I think this is a step in the right direction and is appropriate. Yes?
If that's the case, I would move to approve step 2.
Attachment 2? So if I understand, we have a motion to approve the objectives in attachment 2 for the 2045 long-range transportation plan.
Second.
We have a second. Have a motion and a second. Any comments, questions? Comments or questions from the public? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, I think you get to stay there.
Yep.
2017-2022 TIP Amendment number 11.
All righty. So TIP Amendment number 11 this month comes in 3 different parts. The first part is coming from the City of Colorado Springs. They're requesting to add $2.8 million of CDOT permanent water quality mitigation pool funds to the TIP with a $2.1 million local match. Those permanent water quality funds are new funds that are coming into our region that we're adding into the TIP, so we're not taking it away from any other funding category. And the city is planning to design, construct, and maintain a critical full-spectrum basin at the northwest corner of Powers Boulevard and Research Parkway. We sent out an email last week with a map of that. I can pull it up here on the screen as well if you would like to see that again. The second part is from CDOT. And they're requesting to add $900,000 of bridge on-system funds to the TIP. Again, this is new money that is coming to our region. and they are planning to repair and realign the culvert needing attention on State Highway 94. Again, that was another item we had on that map we emailed out, but I can show that on the screen as well today if you need. And then the last part of amendment number 11 is also coming from CDOT. Their fiscal year ended back in July, and so they have provided us with the new funding totals that we have for each of the funding categories of CMAQ, STP Metro, and TAP. So attachment number 4 of your packet breaks that down in a spreadsheet. I should point out that all of these numbers are in thousands, which is why there's a decimal point there. So let me just pull it up here. So here we have STP Metro now has $7,947,000, and this is all for fiscal year 2018. CMAQ has $1,382,000, and TAP has $756,000. So those are the new funding pool amounts that we have. And then over on the right, you can see the unprogrammed funds that we have for each of those funding categories. So those are the 3 parts of TIP Amendment number 11. I'll take any questions that you have on that.
You have any questions from the board? Seeing none, I'll enter.
Quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
So what's the process of unprogrammed funds? Are we looking for projects? Are we
So-
in risk of being scooped?
So what we're planning to do right now if you remember last month, the Board of Directors approved that flexible funding policy that allows us to address cost overruns. So these funds would be eligible for cost overruns if we received any of those. I sent out I put together a template for project sponsors to fill out if they are experiencing cost overruns, and I sent that out to them a couple weeks ago. At this point, we haven't heard anything back from anybody about them experiencing cost overruns, so these funds are still there as of right now. And right now, we're also gearing up for our next TIP, the 2019 to 2022 TIP. And because that TIP is not adding new fiscal years, we're not adding new funding for future years because it's not adding new years. The next call for projects is going to just be for the unprogrammed funds that are in the current TIP. So kind of 2 different ways of possibly using those funds.
Okay, seeing no other further questions, at this point, I entertain a motion to approve.
I'm going to move to approve FY 2017-2022 TIP Amendment 11.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Good. Thank you.
Thanks. Next item up is the PPACG Board of Directors bylaws, a significant administrative effort over the last several months.
Good morning. I'm Jessica McMullen, Policy and Communications Director here at PPACG. As of last Friday, after the board meeting, we did get some really good questions on this bylaw process. One of the questions that we had is, what are the specific questions that we're asking of the board? The Bylaws Committee did meet several times and really looked through the bylaws for the sections that we needed to edit. So we sent you all a red line copy of it that asked for specific things. We asked to insert an article on purpose. Give me just a moment. Somehow it didn't get the most recent one.
Yeah. We'll be ditching the coats here pretty quick. Right. Anytime you get a bunch of politicians, you get a lot of hot air going here. So.
The suggested language, so we asked, what should this say to the board? Should the purpose of the role of directors be to hire, fire, supervise the executive director, support the running of PPACG programs, coordinate regional efforts. We needed everyone's input on what that purpose should be listed as. Does anyone have any feedback on that?
I have to apologize. I missed the fact that you asked the question when you emailed that out. Sharon, you were the chair, so do you have any comments on this?
The purpose of the board?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we wanted to insert, I believe, Norm, you brought that up, that you wanted a purpose in there. Did you write anything out for what your suggestions were? No, neither did I. It became a concern of mine when we were using the bylaws recently, that it's not stated in there real clearly what the purpose of the board is, what our role is. And I think that just needed to be clearly stated in here. You know, the role, what is our role as the board? What do we do? And one of the main things that the board should be doing is, I know there has to be a much more graceful way to say it, but the hiring, the firing, and the writing the job description for the executive director. I think that's really important because it states the purpose that the board wants to go. And when reviewing the bylaws, that really wasn't in there very clearly, and that's a stated purpose of the board. And so I just think that's important that it's in there. And then under the job description of the executive director may or may not be included in the bylaws, because then every time you decide to change the job description, you have to come back and change the bylaws. So you could go as generic as something that I just said, stated a lot more gracefully. But that was kind of one of the main reasons that we were wanting to look at some of these. And then just some other cleanup stuff, some stuff that was outdated. But right now, we just need to, do we want to insert an article on what the purpose of the board is? So
I will chime in. Rick just pointed out that the version you guys did get in your board packets actually has a draft of this that says the purpose and responsibilities of the board of directors shall include, but not be limited to, 1, adopting the bylaws and any changes thereto, 2, establishing the overall objectives and policies of the PPACG, 3, adopting an annual financing plan for the council, 4, reviewing on its own motion or at the request of any committee, any action of the requesting committee, and 5, may employ an executive director who is employed at the pleasure of the board of directors. That should be what was in your packets as I'm looking at mine.
Yes, that is what I have.
okay, it's not it.
I don't know why it's not right in the one I've got pulled up. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is the one that the bylaws committee did suggest.
Okay, because mine's blank here, just like hers.
Yeah, mine is actually.
The online agenda one is messed up. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This is my fault.
Okay. Does that sound like what everybody would think the purpose of the board would be?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that works.
Do I see any objections to that specific one? Okay, I will mark that as approved. The second one, the board suggested removing editing meeting participation to say board members may participate remotely in PPACG board meetings in unusual circumstances and when necessary. We do have occasional needs to complete a quorum to allow people to conference call in, but we do want people to understand that being here is preferred. Was there any questions on that? Okay. Section 4 has some more questions to it, and again, I'm really sorry that this version is not showing them. We wanted to edit special meetings so that it would say special meetings of the council for any purpose may be called by direction of the chairperson of the council or when unavailable by any 2 officers. Business transacted at all special meetings shall be confined to the purposes stated in the notice of such meeting. Does that sound all right? Thank you, guys, and I'm sorry.
No objections?
Within place of meeting, we removed either within or without the state of Colorado, as all meetings of PPACG will be held in Colorado. Is that acceptable? sorry, as I just stare at this in irritation. We did ask to move notice of meeting to 24 hours, which is the requirement of sunshine law. This original bylaws had 7 days, which meant that committee meetings and any form of additional information became very difficult to do correctly.
Editorial comment is that extended time required for notice was quite the handicap over the last year.
That can require stamps.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that acceptable?
Yes.
You'll notice I'm just going to keep running around.
Yep.
Yeah, just keep going.
There was a debate amongst the board whether the quorum should remain 33% or be moved to 50%. The Bylaws Committee concluded that it should remain 33%. Any thoughts or comments on that?
But it's not a fall on the sword deal, Jill, so go ahead, if you wanted to
Well, I,
say.
of course, supported them having a majority, but I guess the fact is we rarely get a majority, so we would rarely get to do business if we had a majority, which makes me sad that it's just the reality.
I think the hope is by having the call-in feature, if this passes,
We can pick that up.
that we can pick up some of the people from the outlying communities that it might not work for them to come in, and we could raise that quorum.
Probably had more discussion about this item than most of the items that we discussed about as far as when we redid the articles.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we did. But gathering the quorum, I think today is a perfect example of 50%. We would not be, I don't think we'd be there. Okay.
So remain at 33.
33.
The next one adds one sentence pretty much that is pertinent other than cleaning up language, which is the chair of the board shall serve as
Ex officio.
member of all ad hoc board committees. Was there any objections to that statement?
Just to clarify, does ex officio mean a voting member or non-voting?
Non-voting member of all.
Non-voting.
To clarify.
Okay. Yes.
Why,
Under-
what?
Under the Executive Committee, Section 10, we did remove meetings may be called by the chair of the PPACG board or by the request of 3 members of the Executive Committee. Notification of the meeting to the Executive Committee members and the public shall be pretty much all the things we already covered in earlier things. So, did anyone have any questions on it?
In reality, this was, as I recall, was more redundant than anything else, so it was an administrative cleanup.
Okay. Under the Legislative Committee, we added that the PPACG chair shall appoint a chair to the Legislative Committee each year. That wasn't formally in the language on the Legislative Committee, so it was undetermined how that chair would be determined. Okay. I've got the right one pulled up now, so I just want everyone to notice that. I found it. Participating members, we did specify that the alternate shall meet all the requirements of the voting representative in the primary representative's absence. Before that, the language was unclear and would have allowed them to have full voting rights, even if the primary was there. Section A2 has some pretty much solid rewriting. It now says transit representative per Federal Highway FHWA guidance, PPACG is required to have a voting member representing the interests of transit. The City of Colorado Springs, City of Fountain, and El Paso County shall alternate between primary and alternate membership each year appointed annually. We did ask to specify that the City of Colorado Springs shall hold primary membership every other year, with the City of Fountain and El Paso County alternating during the interim year. When the City of Colorado Springs is not primary, they shall serve as first alternate. And the reason that is because the city of Colorado Springs has the dominant transit.
So I think this all must have occurred when I was out of the room, because I don't agree to any of this. So I would like to discuss, this is the only issue I have with the entire bylaw change. For starters, when we had this discussion, we discussed that the FHWA really wasn't the guidance. It's the MAP 21 guidance, the federal transportation law. So that specifically, that guidance isn't correct. And I guess I'm struggling. I mean, I really appreciate that it seems like we're trying to give Colorado Springs some dominance here, but I mean, factually, Colorado Springs provides about 99% of all transit trips in the region, and we are the only, Mountain Metro is the only organization that receives federal transportation funds from the FTA, the only one. And so we are really the only, Mountain Metro is really the only true transit provider in the region. So I guess I'm struggling with the idea that we should not have that transit role, which is how it was set up. I represent this position now, and I think that the importance of it is that before each meeting, Mountain Metro representatives always provide me information for the meeting, their recommendations on how I should be voting relative to transit's interests from the City of Colorado Springs being the regional provider. So I as the City of Colorado Springs representative, have that feedback from Mountain Metro. The other communities don't have that. So I don't think that it's probably, I mean, and I know it sounds like we're just trying to be controlling, but I think it just makes really good sense for PPACG to have the expert advice from the City of Colorado Springs when we're representing PPACG as the transit provider for the region. So if we can't agree on this today, I'd really like to take this back. I'd also like either Craig Blewett or Brian Vitulli to come and talk a little bit from their perspective on how they see this role, because at the very least, we need to change the reference, because that's not the guidance that this requirement comes from.
I would like to add one thing. The initial language here had a special transit non-voting member, and that was
And we did take that out.
part of the discussion about we wanted to make sure we removed that so that it was a voting member. I'll pull up Brian or Craig to answer your question.
While he's coming up, what is the correct reference? If it's not,
Currently, it says per FHWA guidelines.
yeah, but what is the correct one?
Craig can answer that.
Oh, okay.
He's the expert.
I believe it's from the federal legislation law, which is currently FAST.
Fast.
Yes, but it was initially established, I believe, in MAP 21. So, just a couple comments. With regard to I think the overall intent of having meaningful representation of transit at the table is to have that perspective, the transit perspective, during the discussions of how we move forward as a region on a number of items. And I think that the points that the Councilmember Gabler made is that we are provide 99% of the trips in the region. We are the ones who are the direct recipient of FTA funds and follow all the FTA guidance and get regular briefings on circulars, new direction from the FTA, in terms of how we need to move forward and mesh with the region and collectively move forward for the region. So I think we're the closest engaged to what's going on at the federal level with regard to transit. And I think the relationship we have with our council members, our elected officials, allows us to sort of stay engaged and move forward in the right way. So we fully support, I think, from our standpoint, from staff standpoint, of having City of Colorado Springs elected officials also serve as the voting representation.
Is it true that only Colorado Springs receives 5310 and 5311 money? Those are just federal, so I'm just saying.
Correct. We're the only direct recipient. Some FTA funds have gone to both Fountain Valley Senior Center, and I think that may be it. But it goes through us, or it can go through the state, but does not go directly to the City of Fountain. So if those grants come in, we administer those grants. We may award Fountain Valley Senior Center with a vehicle, for example, for grant funding for a vehicle, but we still have the responsibility for carrying out that grant.
I think 5311 money has gone to Cripple Creek Transit, for example, for bus sheds and transfer points and.
Yeah, 5311 funding that goes, okay, so there's a Colorado Springs urbanized area, and we receive, the bulk of FTA funds come from the Colorado Springs urbanized area. Up in Teller County, Woodland Park is an urban cluster and is eligible for 5311 funding that comes through the state of Colorado, but not directly through the FTA. So that money is awarded from the FTA to the state. The state can then, as a sub-recipient, issue those grants to other areas throughout the state. And there are about 64, I think, transit agencies throughout the state.
My own comment on there is, when we were in the discussion, I was somewhat neutral, but because I think the Fountain and the county are both have a stake in the table, or, which while Mountain Metro provides the bulk of it, it's not all of it, and I think the other communities, are part of the requirements, transit requirements, which not necessarily come in there. So however this is, I'm kind of neutral on that particular point, but I think they would have some discussion point about whether they should have a little bit stronger voice on a rotating basis. Yes, go ahead.
There was discussion in the Bylaws Committee about how both El Paso County and the City of Fountain both may in the future be expanding their current efforts. And because of that, we wanted the bylaws to represent that as well. But we wanted to make sure that the City of Colorado Springs maintained dominance, which is why we wanted them to be the primary every other year.
I think the concern is that, as Craig said, it's the city that receives the funds from the FTA and has the expert, just information that can be provided to the transit rep through the City of Colorado Springs. So it's not about control. It's more about having the information and being the conduit from Mountain Metro to PPACG. And without having that be a representative to the City of Colorado Springs, we lose that connection. So I still think we should keep it as it is. And if and when either entity decides to create some sort of, transit, I don't know if that will happen. It may be that Mountain Metro starts providing more significant service, which is what I would hope would happen, and have them become a more regional entity, which would make better sense for our community and provide a lot of cost savings. We could modify that then.
Well, one comment I'll make is that the existing language is actually fairly ambiguous about how that was. So we absolutely needed to put some more specificity in there. Councilwoman Thompson?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll tell you, Councilwoman Gabler, I'm not sure I disagree with you at this point, but I'm also not quite convinced I'm in complete agreement either. And while I understand that the city is responsible for most of the transit infrastructure, my concern is a lot of the citizens and constituents that ride the transit fall under the county's jurisdiction. They're constituents of the county. In addition, the other concern I have is I know there are always significant discussions over transit access to services that are provided by the county. And so, while you control the infrastructure, the City of Colorado Springs controls the infrastructure, I believe the decisions that are made in the transit arena impact us all. So for example, where we place services is important to the transit infrastructure. And so, I might be there with you, but I think I need time to go back and explore this with our staff to understand all of the ramifications before I'm comfortable making a decision.
I think that's a fine idea to wait.
So I'd recommend that we would table this particular piece and move on with the rest of it.
And I will agree with Councilmember Gabler when she says that that you guys are trying to be the big dog in the fight, and they're all, well, the attitude is there, and it is, if this is truly a regional board, then what is the problem with someone from the county or Fountain being in charge in Mountain Metro, discussing it with them and the needs and concerns? I think everybody's here to look at what can be done best regionally, not just done best, within one jurisdiction. And Fountain does have a metro, a transit thing. We do have it, and we're not trying to take over for anybody. But I think, and we try to look a lot more regionally than thinking it's acceptable for our citizens to ride on the bus for 7 hours to get up to the service center up at the county, which we get concerns about that quite frequently, and have met with little help to none from Mountain Metro when it comes to trying to resolve that issue. We've been trying to work with them for the past 6 months and getting nothing. So maybe there is sometimes need to be a little bit push from people outside of the direct involvement. And as the county expands, you do have people that need services out there and might need some input. So I'm fine with moving forward and tabling this one item and getting it. Maybe getting it straightened out a little bit better. But I know the original intent when we voted on this like 3 years ago was to be like this, and it has not been being interpreted that way, and it didn't get written up that way, unfortunately, either.
Okay, so we'll, seeing
Table it and
concurrence
follow
on
up?
which, we'll table this particular item and move with the rest.
Should the Bylaws Committee meet on this to discuss it, or would it like to be brought to the entire board?
I think the bylaws committee should undertake to address this particular thing at a time and then bring it back a recommendation to the board.
Yeah, and that's fine. And then whatever we end up with and then send it out, we really do need people to respond back about it. This,
Right.
This could have been done offline and maybe taken care of. But I believe you received 0 responses back?
Correct. The next section is about non-voting memberships. We wanted to remove the associate membership and supporting members, as they have never been used in memory of any staff member or board member. These were set up so that someone could pay to participate in the committees or board.
Seeing no objection.
Okay. We did maintain honorary membership, where we ask federal and state representatives to have honorary non-voting membership. And we did maintain special memberships for Colorado Transportation Commission, Colorado Air Quality Control Commission, military community resources, and regional military bases. We did remove that the term of office for memberships in the council shall be for a 1-year period, due to our military non-voting members often switching in either different timelines or existing for longer than that. We didn't want to tell them that they could only exist within a certain period. And I get a thumbs up from the military members. I'm good with that. We updated language in officers, and we updated language in duties.
You left out a deletion.
Hmm?
You didn't mention the deletion.
Hold on.
Special membership for public transportation representative.
Yes, we did recommend removing that section, as we had addressed the requirement for transit representation within the earlier transit section, so we removed it as a special membership. Okay. Okay. Within section 6, one of the things we wanted to cover with all of you is Section 6, Delegation of Authority. In case of the absence of any officer of the board, or for any reason that it may deem sufficient, the board may delegate the powers of duties of such officer to any other officer, provided that the majority of the entire board concurs therein. And the question was, do we need this to specify that officers can fill other officers' positions in cases of absence, or is this an unnecessary section? We kind of felt it was redundant because the role of the officers is to be able to backfill each other. That's what first vice chair and second vice chair, and the understanding that the treasurer and the secretary can each have someone who is kind of their secondary.
I recommend deletion.
Okay.
I recommend deletion. I think this is redundant. Yes.
Did you mention the last two lines of section 2 duties? Did you mention that orally?
Chair and secretary of the board may be signatories
Yeah, and
instead of all officers, yeah.
we did update that because as of recent memory, the chair and secretary have been the only ones who have been signatories on the PPACG banking documents, but that way we can always ensure transactions can occur in the absence of the board treasurer. So it's treasurer, chair, and secretary may serve as signatories.
Okay.
We requested moving waiver of notice, which was Article 6, that said whenever any notice is required to be given to any council member, a waiver thereof is in writing but signed by the person or persons entitled to such notice shall be equivalent to the giving of such notice. We believe that this was originally intended to require mailed board documents, and now that the board, several of you do choose to just receive them electronically, this became unnecessary. Okay. We did request that bylaws amendments require a supermajority, 2/3 vote of authorized participating members in attendance to allow for bylaws amendments, rather than just a majority vote. Agreed. Okay.
Okay.
That was the extent of our changes. Did anyone have any other additional comments, or we will just return with the language for the transit representative next month, provided all my bylaws committee members can meet?
Commissioner Clark?
Excuse me. I just have one kind of innocuous thing that I wanted to draw your attention to on page 3, at least the copy that I have, where it talks about section 6, notice of meeting. It looks like the ability for PPACG, or essentially the requirement to put the agenda on, or the notice of meeting on the PPACG website. It notes here that the Fountain City Clerk told that online can create a violation if a citizen has an internet error. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I think that it should be in both places, that it should be placed in the front foyer as well as online, so that those who are not necessarily living right here close by don't have to come down to the PPACG office to look up the agenda. And so, and if I can just finish, the other thing that I wanted to suggest is the only way you can view those would be to come inside, and the office is not open every day. So perhaps a notification bulletin board or something could be put outside so that folks could come up and look at the agenda even if the office was closed. That's the only thing that I really saw that I had a concern about. I think we need to make it as easy as possible for citizens to be able to review and pull up the agendas should they want to participate.
So the city attorney we had at the time, Al Ziegler, when we were discussing this a couple of years ago, stated that you only want that to be your official posting place. You will still put it online, obviously, because you want as many people to know about it, but that you don't necessarily want that to be your official thing, because if the PPACG website crashed and it wasn't accessible for the number of necessary hours for the Open Meeting Act, that you couldn't have a meeting. So while that's only going to be your official posting place, then you're still going to have it online and anywhere else you can get the word out to it, so that citizens have access to it. It's just to create any problems so that you couldn't have the meeting.
So, and I appreciate that clarification. I just think, I guess I would feel better if it was memorialized somewhere that it will be posted as on the website as well, that it's not necessarily required, but additionally it will be posted.
You can clarify that that's not the official posting place, yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that since you're going to a 24-hour notice, I think it would be prudent to consider putting a board outside where it can be put outside if somebody wanted. I mean, truly, I'm not thinking that people are breaking down the doors, coming to look at your agendas. I mean, we would hope that there would be a lot of interest in this board and what goes on here, but I just think that it would be helpful if they don't have to go inside, so that if you post something on a Friday for a Monday meeting, that's 24 hours in advance, but if they're not here by 5 p.m. on Friday, then they can't see it. So that's my only comment. Thank you very much.
Trustee Smith, did you?
And thanks to the Bylaws Committee, too, for all the work you've done.
Trustee Smith, did you have something to add to that, or was that covered?
No, I was just going to share the same thing that Sharon
okay.
shared as far as the posting it on the website.
Okay.
Does
Any
the
other
board-
comments?
Does the board want to add a sentence that says, and unofficially shall be on the PPACG website, or do you want to leave it like it is, where it is all of our practice that all of our information be available electronically?
Sense from the board? As long as it's unofficial, so that it doesn't wipe us out for a meeting if it crashes. I'm okay with that. When
I believe we've
possible,
got a
or
comment
something
from
like
our
that.
CAC chair real quick.
Oh, yes. Mr. Moore.
Jim Moore, Chairman of the CAC. I'm going to step out of that role for a second because I've done some work in nonprofit governance. And the comment that I would suggest that y'all keep in mind is too much detail in the bylaws really binds you. For example, in the discussion about the transit representative, it may be sufficient in the bylaws to simply say the PPACG board will comply with federal guidelines in maintaining a representative for transit, period. And then deal with the detail as to who will be that representative in a policy, which does not require the same kind of handsprings and backflips that you've got to go through to change the bylaws. You may have the same sort of situation here, where the discussion about how notice is achieved could be in a policy and simply indicate what you must meet in terms of the formal legal requirements. That could be in the bylaws. But things change, and how often you want to deal with the bylaws changes. I
think that's a really great point.
Okay.
And let's take those particular issues that we have and take them back and determine whether it's a bylaws or a written policy. But if it is a policy, of course, it does have to be a written policy, and we have to kind of define where that is. Right.
So quick question, do you want to go back to the transit representative and change that to Jim's suggested language of we will follow the guidelines and have a voting transit representative?
Yeah, let's take it offline and bring it back, and we can have that discussion.
Okay.
Okay?
I need a motion.
Okay, so at this point, open for a motion to approve the bylaws as presented with those two caveats.
So moved.
Have a motion? A motion and a second. Any final comments? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Thank you all very much.
I was going to ask for clarification, the motion to have the 7A pulled off, that's all, or
Yes.
whatever that number was. Okay.
Yeah, that was. Okay. And that is quite a bit of heavy lifting to have done that. Let's go ahead and take the first discussion item before we take a break. Discussion item 6A, the TIP project delay policy.
Good morning again. Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner with PPACG. So PPACG has a TIP policy. It's called the TIP delay policy. And basically what that says is we review all the projects that are programmed in the TIP every 6 months to kind of just monitor their progress and see if there's any delays going on. And if there are delays, then the board has the option to take action if it's delayed by more than 2 years. So I followed up with CDOT and all of the project sponsors over the past couple months, and I put together a list of the projects that they identified that were experiencing delays. And those projects are identified in attachment number 2 of your packet. And each of those projects identifies why it's delayed, It identifies what they're planning to do to address the delay, and then they're also identifying kind of the timeline of when they think that it's going to be finished. So if there's, I'll take any questions on that list of projects.
Any questions? Very good. Seeing no questions.
All right.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Is it the board's pleasure to take a break at this point before we start the reports, or shall we dive in? Dive. Navy guy can get that one. 7A, military installations reports. I'll let you go.
Rod Chisholm again from Fort Carson. Just wanted to let you know, it may have been mentioned by our alternate from Fort Carson last month, but it has been confirmed that our current commander, Major General Gonzalez, will relinquish command on the 24th of August at 10 o'clock. Some invitations have gone out to some of the folks in this room, and the new incoming commander, Major General Randy George, will take command that same day on the 24th of August. So that's the big change, although this is the season of many changes of a lot of the commanders that we have. We're sort of at the end of that, particularly for those grades, whether it's senior NCOs or officers that have kids. They all want to try to make that move before school starts. So we're at the end of that transition period. A big thing going on at Fort Carson is some train up for some major deployments. So this time next year, we'll have 2 of our brigades that will actually be supporting operations overseas and deployments. Our 1st Stryker Brigade and our 2nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team. So right now, they're getting ready to get through the end of September and into the fall, go to some major training exercises where they'll be practicing those deployments at some of the national training centers, and then coming back to actually do the major deployment. Our 3rd Brigade is deployed and will be coming back in about the next 90 days. So a lot of movement going on at Fort Carson. People coming back from our 3rd Brigade and 2 brigades getting ready to go out. To include by this time next year, the division headquarters will actually be deployed. So Major General George will be in command and take a deployment as well, and that doesn't rotate that often to the 4th Infantry Division. So those are some big things that will be happening, and as more events transpire, we'll just keep you informed of those movements. But a lot of intensity in the training in our ranges and in these deployment exercises. That's all I have.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Randy George was stationed here before. How long ago was it, and what job did he have then?
Well, he's actually had, he was a brigade commander here, and then his latest assignment, which was about 3 years ago, was as a deputy commanding general. So he has served, I think, a total of 3 times in the past. But as a commander, both the brigade commander and deputy commanding general were his last 2.
General Gonzalez has been a true friend of Fountain. He's done a lot of reaching across the border, so to say, and we really appreciate that, and we're very sad to see him moving on. And I will be attending the ceremony, but we just really appreciate his friendship to the city.
He loves this community. He was born at Fort Carson. He's had 4 assignments there, and he's a little bit teary-eyed because he knows as a major general he'll never go back as an installation commander. It'll be moving up to staff positions if he stays in. So, so he loves this community and wouldn't be surprised if one day when he decides to retire, he may come back, but that's not confirmed.
Okay, thank you. Charles?
Hey, good morning. Pat Carley from the Air Force Academy. Just a few things. We also have some leadership changes coming up here this Friday, the 11th, at 9:30. Lieutenant General Johnson will be retiring and giving up the flag to Major General Severia. Major General Severia will be promoted before the ceremony on Friday morning, and then he will take command of the Academy. On the athletic front, 6 home football games this season, the first one being Saturday, the 2nd of September against VMI at 12:05. But there's also 26 other NCAA Division I sports at the Academy, and a few of them are starting up this month to include men and women's soccer, women's volleyball, and men's tennis. And the men's soccer and men's tennis have home games later this month, starting on the 19th of August will be the first men's soccer game at home. And we also have an American kickoff concert coming on Saturday, the 16th of September, where the headliner is Blake Shelton with a few other performers. there at Falcon Stadium. And if you're interested in attending that, it's www.americankickoff.com. Any questions for me on the Academy?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Colonel?
Good morning. I'm Colonel Todd Moore. I'm the installation commander at Peterson Air Force Base, as well as the commander at 21st Space Wing. I've had the opportunity to meet several of you. To those who I haven't, hello. It's a pleasure being back here in Colorado Springs for the third time in my professional career, although this being the first one at Peterson. As I think probably everybody's aware, the PFOS-PFOA meetings on the 25th of July with the Air Force Civil Engineers Center were mixed. We acknowledge the fact that the site inspection report probably contained less detail than really what folks wanted, and it was less than what we wanted at Peterson as well. And we acknowledge also that the site inspection itself left the engineers with more questions than answers. And so the Air Force is committed to following through on this circular process where we do an expanded site inspection, where we drill more wells, we take more samples to fully understand the full extent of PFOS and PFOA contamination from Peterson Air Force Base. Nonetheless, we're committed to that. From a Peterson Air Force Base perspective, we're also committed to acknowledging some of the challenges we had as we engaged with the civic leaders as well as the community. A few of those things included how we're getting information to the community. There's been, to my knowledge, as I get up to speed rapidly on this, is that there have been meetings on this topic at the working level with community, within the community. I'm getting my hands around those meeting minutes as well as the attendance rosters as well. To make sure, one, that we're inviting the right people from the communities, two, that they're getting that information to you, and three, that notification of the meeting is happening in time. Also acknowledge the fact that the town hall that we did, or the community event that we did, is certainly not the last one that I'll step into. That we owe you that continued engagement, that continued commitment to do exactly that. One of the things that I took away from the engagement that we had was that there were significant questions that the Air Force couldn't answer, really shouldn't represent. Those really circulated around the water quality as well as the regulatory policy. And so as we go forward in re-engaging with the community, it's going to be really important to us as from an Air Force perspective in trying to achieve a meaningful discussion. To make sure that we have the water purveyors available in that fora, as well as making sure that the EPA is there to answer any regulatory questions, because I think both of those things contribute to a fuller understanding of where we're going as we do our due diligence for the community. In terms of the funds that have been discussed at length in the past, the staff and I have engaged with Air Force leadership to understand where the disconnect is between the headquarters Air Force and the Corps of Engineers, and so we're climbing into that, scraping away on some of the facts to hopefully bring that back to have a more meaningful discussion, because there appears to be a disconnect in the communication there, and so we're hoping to put some light and heat, if necessary, to go ahead and break that loose. That's all I have. Any questions on that topic?
I can't imagine why you would have a question, Councilwoman.
We did appreciate the meeting you had. Appreciate the time. Appreciated both Commissioners, Lahinos and Waller, coming down to the meeting, and Senator Gardner. The timing, I know, is bad for our representative from that area was out of town. I think some of the concerns I heard from the meeting were a little frustration from the people that it was just an open house forum and there wasn't an opening statement from the Air Force to the citizens that were there. There was people in the parking lot at least an hour ahead of time, and they literally were coming to get good seats to be in the front row. And when I was walking around telling them there wasn't going to be a opening statement, they were a little disappointed. They weren't looking to argue. You know, they're just concerned, of course. You know, when you're saying we're working on the reimbursement, between all the three water providers, we're looking around $11 million I think any city would say that's going to take a significant toll on their budget. We did get the second filtration system, but again, no long-term plan on who's going to pay for those long-term. Fortunately, with Fountain, we were able to shut down our wells, so our citizens are drinking just surface water. And I mean, literally, I think it was 2 weeks ahead of time, we were at the ribbon-cutting ceremony out there for the SDS system, and of course, we're using Fryer Arc water. But for Fountain alone, it's $3.7 million that our utilities is going to be pouring into this. And we had citizens at our meeting last night expressing concern and frustration once again on, they know there's more water increases coming, and Social Security hasn't been real forthcoming with the funds to keep up with those necessarily. So there's concerns. How are they going to, be paying to keep their lawns green? They want to have a little gardening. And, they keep, everything's going up. We all understand that. But to put this again on the backs of the citizens until maybe we get reimbursed someday is a concern. And I know you and I have talked about that, but just want to express it publicly that continues to be a concern at $3.7 million number at Colorado Springs. But, the big guys in the room, I think that $3.7 million would be something to your budgets too if you had to,
I think we'd be hurt too.
Yeah. And, we're putting off projects, things like repairing water mains, and different things that are going to be important to the community long term. You can only put off infrastructure stuff for so long, and then you start having, big problems with it. So we have contacted Representative Lamborn's office, and he's committed to helping work with us on this and get some of that money back because it is going to be needed in that community. So thank you.
Commissioner Waller, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the update. We appreciate it, Colonel Moore. I just want to echo some of what Councilwoman Thompson said about the mitigation efforts moving forward. I'll maybe be a little more blunt than she was. It was frustrating, to say the least, to hear what we heard in those meetings, because as I think you stated at one point, we have more questions now than we did before. And that's just not something we can take back to our constituents, right? And so I think moving forward, I get that this is going to take a couple of years to answer the questions, hopefully answer the questions to the satisfactorily to the Air Force, but until we get there, the number one, no kidding priority has to be, how do we mitigate this until we get those answers? In some cases, I think your experts told us that that these contaminants tested out more than 1,000 times greater than the EPA standards. So that tells me we no kidding have to have real mitigation efforts in place. And I think that when we had the discussions during the meetings, that was the one area where we were really woefully short on answers. We didn't know if mitigation efforts were going to go beyond even this year. What the Air Force is going to do to make the citizens of Fountain and Security and Whitefield whole. And maybe they're not. Maybe that's not in the cards. Maybe that's not going to happen. And you know what, if it's not, we'd rather have that answer now so we can start moving down the road to figure out ways to overcome these financial challenges in other ways. Do we need to be going to the state government and asking for them in some way to declare this as a federal disaster, or make a request to the federal government to declare this as a disaster area so we can get some sort of FEMA funds? We just need answers.
Yes, sir. So I appreciate that. And so I think, but that's one of the reasons why, in particular, I would request that EPA is part of this discussion as well, because I think they're able to give us a little more context in terms of the nature of this contamination. And the guidelines, I think it tied in closely with a little bit of the discussion about ADA earlier, that even when we comply with the regulatory structures provided by ADA, it may not be fully sufficient, and that there's implications, or maybe there are times where there's a need to go above and beyond the regulatory structure. But I think that's one of the reasons why the EPA needs to be there, in order to provide a little more insight into that. And if I could, sir, absolutely, on the remediation in particular, That is what that expanded site inspection is supposed to give us some context on. Where do we need to remediate? I can't necessarily answer for the complexities of the engineering or the structures or the way water moves around Peterson Air Force Base as to why we couldn't get there straight away. But I do appreciate the fact that we're doing our due diligence to do the expanded inspection so that we can get to remediation. As it relates to mitigation, I don't have, unless you want me to, the steps we have done at Peterson Air Force Base to make sure that we're not putting this contaminant into the water stream. I tried to outline those. Happy to revisit those if you'd like, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not making myself clear on how I interpret the word mitigation. I mean, I appreciate that we're not putting contaminants in the groundwater supply anymore. I think part of mitigation is taking care of the cost of filtration and things of that nature until we get to remediation. You know, so right now we got to just sort of do the stopgap to make this work until we get to, okay, we know what the problem is and we know how to remediate it. But for the next 2 years, until we know what the problem is, there has to be some sort of mitigation in place. One other thing I'd like to comment on, I appreciate now the thought that the EPA needs to be a part of this. It was somewhat disappointing that we had to jump through a tremendous number of hoops to even get the EPA invited to the meeting in the first place. I don't know if you have a comment on that or not.
Sir, I don't have a comment on that. I think it probably was a miscommunication of sorts. But back to the point, back to the beginning, is that we are climbing into understanding where the disconnect is between the Headquarters Air Force and the Corps of Engineers in order to address those funds. And my desire is the next time we engage in a public forum that I would have a little more information for you in that regard, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
I have one last question.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we have an idea of when that next public forum is going to be?
No, sir, we do not. And also acknowledge the fact that we'll make sure that we do a significant amount of deconfliction in advance to hopefully get to a better solution for everybody.
Right. So you've drawn a red box, and basically you're saying you're going to be testing within that red box. Is that correct?
So I can't answer that specifically. I would have to rely on the Air Force Civil Engineers Center for them to specifically answer. But I do believe there are more wells being drilled so we can do more sampling. Where that is, I wouldn't be able to speak to immediately.
So you're looking at studying, I'm not a water person, so you're looking at studying the water flow, how things flow off the base, correct?
I believe that's one of the
So
objectives.
what if it shows that a way the water flows is not in that red box, and so there could be potential contamination, say, east of where you're testing? Are you willing to expand that red box or take care of the people who might fall outside of that? Because I'm not an engineer, but in my world, water flows downhill. Fountain is downhill. Midway is downhill. Parts of the county would be responsible for, and so if there's a chance that the water flow shows it could be outside that box, or are you guys going to be willing to come to the table and discuss that for areas that might be outside of there?
So I think the marching orders, from my perspective, from a Peterson perspective, and if I stepped out of line and represented the objective of the guidance or the intent that we have from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force is that we're transparent. And so the results of whatever that inspection would be is we would share with you. We're partners in this community. It wouldn't be something that we would shy from.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much for bringing all that to us. I know this is a hard subject for us all to.
You're welcome, and we're committed to continue to engage with you on it. Thank you.
Thanks. The Executive Director Search Committee update.
Norm Steen, Chair of the Executive Search Committee. Just briefly update on a timeline. We now have an advertising brochure has been developed and is on the street. Our firm, Mercer Group Incorporated, has begun that active search, looking for candidates. That search period closes on September 14th. On September 15th, the search committee will meet at 3 p.m. in this room to review the candidates, the semifinalists that have been screened out, meeting our profile. And just for the full board, just a reminder that on October 11th, we will meet to interview the finalists that have been narrowed down by that search committee on September 15th. So October 11th is a red letter date for search committee process of the selection. And we do expect, hopefully, if we work out negotiate terms of that hire, that we'll have an executive director on staff, running the staff by the end of the calendar year. That would be our hope. So, any questions? Thank you.
That meeting is in the afternoon, right?
3 p.m. on
3 p.m.
September
on-
15th.
Oh, September 15th.
Yep.
Okay. Community Advisory Committee, go on, let's run on through the committees. TAC? Oh, I'm sorry, TAC.
Good morning again. Brian Vitulli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit. We had 2 meetings in July 20th and 26th, and the notes are in your packet. But the highlighted items are we approved TIP Amendment 11, which you already approved this morning. And we also did a lot of work on the objectives and targets for the 2045 Long-Range Transportation Plan, of which you've approved the objectives this morning. So we'll continue our work this month on the targets and work with the CAC as well, and hope to have something for you to act on next month and to approve the targets. So, are there any questions?
Any questions from the board?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now the CAC.
Again, Jim Moore, Chair of the CAC. You pretty much have dealt with the issues that we dealt with. The only thing that I would mention at this point is that we have sort of concluded our adventure into a discussion of our roles and responsibilities. Commissioner Steen has been kind enough to remind us we owe you that. No great changes, but I think the general feeling in the committee is that it was a good discussion, one that we needed to have, and we certainly appreciate the reinforcement of our role that has come from this body in a variety of forms. So unless there are some questions for me, that concludes what I would say today at this point.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Regional Advisory Council.
Good morning, Dave Betzler, Chair of the Regional Advisory Council. You have their minutes before you. The only thing I would kind of highlight is that there's a pretty interesting discussion that people recognize the aging of the volunteers that are serving so many of the senior nonprofit organizations. And how ironic, exactly. And the burnout factor and the just the general need for trying to remain very vigilant for attracting new personnel, new bodies to help in these nonprofit organizations. It's a very pervasive problem, whether you look at it from the senior perspective, you look at it from the schools, Boy Scouts, churches, whatever it is. So it's just sort of a commentary on where we are today. That's all I wanted to highlight at this point. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to address those.
Any questions? One comment here. I know our aging advisory committee, I forget the name of it, Councilwoman Gaylor, perhaps? Commission on Aging. I think we had a lot of volunteers for that, so maybe we can data mine.
We did.
That'd be good.
We actually talked about what great credentials they had and how we need to keep them engaged.
That's great.
So
I'll talk with you on that
let's
then.
discuss that.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Executive Director's Report.
Good morning again, Rick Sonnenberg. You have my highlights in the packet, but I wanted to highlight a couple items. We had a very successful and well-attended mixer with Kono last Thursday evening. We learned a lot about what Kono does, and we shared what PPACG does with the Kono board and staff and citizen volunteers that were in attendance. Second thing I'd like to highlight is that the PPRTA board, a couple of the board members are also here as PPACG members, board members. But the PPRTA board is continuing its process to go to the ballot on November 7 to ask the voters to add a project to the capital project list, not to increase taxes, but simply to add a project which would be allowing some PPRT funding to go to the I-25 gap project, just the 2 miles within El Paso County, and that's from Highway 105 north to the top of the hill at County Line Road. So the PPRT board is, and that's 2 miles of the 18 or 20 mile I-25 gap project that Mark Andrew might cover here in a minute when he has the CDOT report. But the PPRTA board plans to go to the voters and ask the voters to dedicate some PPRTA funds for the 2 mile section of the larger 18 or 20 mile section that's called the I-25 gap project.
Wasn't there? I thought I'd add it to you anyway.
And that's all I have.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just a quick comment. I just, on behalf of all of us, and I know we're going to have a new executive director hopefully by the end of the year, but great job filling in, and I'm sure we all appreciate how things continue to move along, so thank you very much.
Yeah,
You have no idea how difficult it's been for him having to deal with guys like me.
I have some idea.
Call his wife.
Knowing you as long as I have, never mind. I did at the Kono Mixer made the comment that he's doing such a tremendous job that I canceled the contract, for an executive director. He kind of had the little wide eyes. What was I drinking? Yeah. Okay, the stack. Trustee Smith and I attended the stack meeting this last week. I'm going to highlight 3 items. There weren't any actual decision items, voted on by the stack, but there were a number of information items. We always get a commissioner debrief about all the different subjects that they covered, and it's very long and exhausting. But I'm going to highlight one that really brought some entertaining discussion, which was the EagleNet. So EagleNet is a company that got a $100 million federal grant to put fiber across Colorado. Their specific goal was to go to some of the less served communities. They are declaring bankruptcy, and CDOT is taking a hard look at acquiring the network. Whether they will or not is up in the air. They haven't decided one way or the other. They're just evaluating the proposals. But it was quite interesting. And I asked the question, how do you get $100 million and then declare bankruptcy? And I was wondering where to apply to that. But that's kind of out there pending. They did put in 3,000 miles of fiber across Colorado, quite a lot of it paralleling CDOT's infrastructure. So there is actually, they really did do something with that $100 million, but it's kind of on the table at the moment. The rest of it was kind of quite a long discussion about the 267 financing of how CDOT is sorting through how to work that budget and exactly how that whole thing is going to work. And as part of that is the selection of the projects that would be funded on that list. So follow-on working groups in the months ahead to determine exactly which projects would be funded, assuming that money, the $1.8 billion, actually materializes. And still trying to work through the details of exactly how that legislation works is a challenging project. Finally, the national infrastructure, what the federal government is talking about their national infrastructure plan. The issue that's coming before CDOT and the stack is how to put the projects on that list, and there's, again, quite a lot of work ahead to determine how that's going to be. So more to follow on that. And all of this for the 267 and the national infrastructure, what we call the GAP, what other people call 25 South, and various and sundry names are definitely on those project lists. But fighting to make sure that they are on the list and actually get funding, if and when it appears, will be the future challenge that we're going to come. Trustee Smith, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understood that 260, Senate Bill 267, I don't know if this was a direct cause and effect, but it changed the tip from a 6-year to a 4-year. I don't know. Anyway, it made me nervous as to how, when we have projects on that list and where we've got them set up as to our priority, I'm not sure we're not going to get rolled. So I'm very, very concerned with how this will all work out. There was some good news that came out of that meeting. There is some more Tiger money coming out right now. I don't know how that works out because, as we all know, you got to have money to match it. I don't know if we have any money. So, and then, supposedly there'll be Tiger money next year, and maybe we could, if we can get some little matches here and there, we can, get some money for the gap and get some Tiger money for that.
Yeah, let me amplify on that just a little bit here. I think the federal money that was coming down, it was identified as being through the Tiger Grant program in the near term. Now, what the big plan is when President Trump talks about his infrastructure plan, that's still unknown as exactly how that's going to work. But in the near term, they're talking about Tiger grants, which, of course, as pointed out, needs it. His concern stated that we might get rolled in this process. That was universally held amongst all the TPRs and GOGs that was there. All of them, everybody kind of has that same feeling that we're about to get rolled. But it all rolls down to, pardon the expression, how the money actually generates. If it actually does, we'll see how much and how that's going to work. But the real bottom line is a lot of work in the future yet to determine how the projects come on the list, how they stay on the list, and then how the funding works out. And one final note on the stack was Denver is also in the process of searching for an executive director. So we're all out there competing in there. And Dr. Cog is looking for an executive director. And I made the comment that we were going to data mine their application list, but I won't tell you what his response was. But yes.
Sally Clark. I was also at STAC as well, and one of the things that they presented was the looking at the budget, which is not a pretty picture long term, especially with, and I guess good and bad when you look at the efficiency of vehicles long term, no increases in our gas tax. It's really a bleak picture going forward. So they're looking at many different options. I don't know where it's all going to, no pun, I guess, stack up in terms of how the state is going to look at filling those gaps, but it's not a great picture long term. We obviously want our vehicles to be more efficient, but as you get into more efficiency, then people buy less gas, and if you're dependent on gas tax, and then the HUTF keeps being refilled every time we turn around in terms of making sure that it doesn't go bankrupt, but at the national level, but it's still not a sustainable funding source. So I don't know if there's any other comments, either either of you wanted to make in terms of the budget, or CDOT's here as well, but it might be helpful to get that PowerPoint to our board members that was presented at the STAC meeting to give you an idea of some of the things they're looking at long-term and how it looks as a funding picture. I also just wanted to mention, too, there was just a recent article put out by National Association of Counties on the EPA reversing its decision to delay the ozone regs and rules, and so it will have an impact on us. So I just I had sent it on to Rick and Jessica and asked them to forward that article on so you can be aware of what's going on with the ozone. That's actually unfortunate because they had essentially put a stay on it and now are moving back to making it more stringent in terms of the ozone regs.
Yeah, I just got that last night, so it was a little short to be able to put it on there, and I think we have more questions at this point. But a reversal of a reversal
Right.
at the last minute is kind of difficult to come in there.
Surprising, actually.
It was actually very surprising. I wasn't planning to have a long discussion on it because right now I don't think we really have the answers yet to anything. Other than, I think, if I can ask, the last report I saw on our ozone levels, we were in compliance even with the lower level. So I think in the near term, I think we're okay here, but how it goes in the future, and I think I see somebody standing up to provide some info. Come on back. Pete, come on back.
I'll be brief, I promise. Peter Gillespie, PPACG staff. Yes, we're in compliance with the .07 ozone standards, so even if that stays, hopefully we'll be fine. So no guarantees, though, as the population grows and there's more traffic, more ozone sources. And yet, looking forward, I foresee electric cars making inroads, and they'll start to be part of the mix. So my gut feeling, and it's a little more than an informed feeling, is that we will continue to have excellent air quality. We will be in compliance with all the major air quality criteria and not be constrained by those. That's as much as a hope and a feeling, but it's based on the facts that we have. So, any questions?
Well, my only concern about the electric cars is that in reality they're powered by coal.
Today they're coal
so
cars.
So it's really just shifting.
Yes, you're correct.
Yeah, and natural gas. A somewhat snarky comment on my part, but
Point well taken. You're absolutely right. And today, in this town or in regions where the electricity is primarily or largely generated by coal, an electric car is a coal car, just so you know.
So all they're really doing is transferring one from one emitter to another, but
That's true.
Trustee Smith. And they pay no road tax, which is the problem, goes back to the original comment.
A little bit off topic here, but have we heard anything about the VW money?
No, they had no update at the stack on that either, so that's still a pending issue. I haven't heard any update, unless someone has. No. Okay. Thank you, Pete. We don't have it on the agenda listed. We probably need to add this as a regular item, but the Southwest Chieftain.
Thank you. So I am representing PPACG on this short-term Southwest Chief Commission, and we held our first meeting this past week in Denver, and there are committee members from throughout the region of the Front Range, and it appears that we have created two committees, one that will be focused on how we might reroute the chief to go through Pueblo. And there is a whole group that is working on that, and I guess has been working on that for some time. I didn't know this. And then there's a second group that will be focused on how we might then take the chief north to Colorado Springs and perhaps, hopefully, Denver and into Fort Collins. There are representatives from that northern part of Colorado on this commission. And I am on that group since I represent that area. We will be working together. Right now we're forming our kind of governing documents and figuring out how to move forward. We will be meeting probably several times a month with the goal of getting, per the state statute, some sort of language and bill moved forward by December 1 that says something about how we will fund this reroute and with some plan of how we would possibly fund an extension of the line north. So it's a huge task. I'm not sure how it will be accomplished, but I look forward to representing you from PPACG. Any questions? It would probably be downtown, like where the depot is, the Giuseppe's Depot. That would make sense. But, I mean, it's all completely up in the air and just kind of fun to discuss at this point.
Maybe we could put a little shack there at the coal station. Coal car. Okay, my apologies. CDOT.
Good morning, Mark Andrews, CDOT. Just going to go through the projects that are out in construction right now. We've got a couple overlays, one on 67, one on 50. We're probably about a quarter done with those projects. We've had a lot of rain delays, as you can imagine, and so we're hoping we can get those done this season. We'll see. But we continue to make progress on those. We do have a bridge preventative maintenance project going on in El Paso County, which is really to rehab our concrete structures or bridges. And then we also have the Constitution of Garrett. It's more of a pavement rehabilitation project for the westbound lanes, and I think we're close to getting done with the concrete out there. If not, I haven't been out there for a couple weeks, but that project's actually on schedule, so I think we'll finish that one this year. So I'll have Dave come up, give a brief update on Cimarron, but before we get to that, we plan on coming to the board in September, the TAC and the CAC, with a presentation on the US 24 PEL and the progress that we've made on that project. I think it's gone well. We've had a lot of participation with the Eastern El Paso County, and we're down to what we call our level 3 screening, which is really we've screened out a couple levels of alternatives. Now we're looking at how the traffic model plays into the final alternative analysis and determine what would be the outcome or preferred alternatives that come out of that to take it to the next level, which would be a final environmental document to clear selected projects. Obviously, we don't have any funding for those future projects, just like we don't on I-25, the GAP project, but we want to get in a position to get those projects shelf ready. So quick update on I-25, the GAP project, the PEL. We're down to, we went through the level 1 screening, so we screened out all the big alternatives that really didn't meet our purpose and need. They didn't really provide a reasonable alternative at that level. We're down to level 2 screening, and what we want to do is kind of dovetail that into our traffic modeling, which we're doing right now. So we're doing a lot of traffic collection. We want to model that corridor in conjunction with PPACG, the PPACG and Dr. Cog model, and come up with some good numbers there. And then also with that, we're looking at the tolling study that will accompany that. So we're all interested to see what the tolling study says. A few years ago, the tolling study wasn't real favorable to that option because we weren't taking into account the congestion caused from incidents and accidents. So we see that now, and that's the game changer really on that corridor is the number of incidents that we have on a daily basis is really affecting our capacity on that corridor. So that may play into making tolling more feasible. So more to come on that. There's a public meeting scheduled for September 26th and 28th. One in Colorado Springs and one I think it's in Castle Rock. And we'll give you at the next board update or board meeting. We'll give you more details on that meeting. There's several other outreach meetings going on too with the Motor Carrier Division, Monument. I think we had a public meeting up there too. So there's a lot of selected groups that we're meeting with as we develop the PEL. One of the Commissioner Clark mentioned talking about bringing down Herman Stockinger, our director for government liaison, couldn't give a really good update on our funding situation. I've heard that presentation. I think you had mentioned it was at the STAC. So I think it would be a good presentation to bring down either in September or October to really go over the true funding picture that CDOT is faced with right now. And like what was discussed before, House Bill 267, we don't know. I mean, what projects are going to come out of that? We're just providing information and as best we can, and we'll see how those things play out. And then also with the infrastructure bill that's out there as well. Tiger grants, I know they're new. I have not been requested to submit any projects for Tiger grants, but that's something we may want to look at in terms of Region 2. You know, what could be ready to go and meet the criteria for Tiger. I know it's a hard one to get. I mean, you have to have a lot of criteria met. We've tried a couple times, I believe, on Fillmore before we got that funded, and then also with an interchange on Powers we tried, and we weren't successful. So there's a lot of criteria that really we need to meet. So selecting the right project is critical on that. But an update on the other Tier 1 projects on our 10-year capital list. We continue to move forward with research in Powers, getting that one designed. I mean, we're in the initial stages. We've got a consultant on board to design that project. And then I-25 South, it's actually more encompassing of Fountain all the way up to Woodman, is the way we describe the scope, is really focus on the widening first from Circle down to Academy. We've selected our consultant. That's AECOM. They're going to represent the design for that corridor. And we're looking at writing our first task order to get that project going first, to get that one on the shelf. And then we'll look at, you know, more of the other needs within the corridor, including possibly ramp metering. I know there's another effort going on with ramp metering as well. So bottom line is we're just trying to get those projects ready to go if money shows up. So so some good news on that. And I think that's all I had. I think, Dave, are you out there? You want to give us a quick update on Cimarron?
Real quick while he's coming up, on the
You take your raincoat off.
on the road widening, were you stopping at South Academy exit, right? Is that what you're stopping at?
Well, with the widening, yeah. Right now we are looking at trying to get shelf ready down to South Academy. We're also going to look at more of a planning level look at getting down to 16 to see what it would take if we were to get money to add that. Now, right now, the environmental...
16 is South Academy.
No, 16 is...
I'm sorry.
Between South Academy
132.
and Fountain. 132.
Yeah, so we really need it down to 128. Because that Gate 20 exit is just backing, I mean, the circle was great for the first year, but it's backing up onto the freeway again a lot of evenings.
Understand. And, you know, one of the things that we have we call a white topping, or it's a pavement rehabilitation project where we actually have to overbuild one side of the roadway to construct that concrete pavement. So we're looking at ways, and just keep this in the room here, if you will, ways to...
This is a public meeting.
I know.
I don't think so.
On YouTube.
That was a joke.
Then it go on YouTube, yeah.
That was a joke. But what we want to do is look at how we can widen that road with the understanding that we could someday come back and maybe look at preserving that segment for possibly a 6-lane section. So right now we have no planning level document that says we have to widen down to Fountain. But with that said, we know that eventually we're going to have to probably get there. But without predetermining the alternative of what we need there, we want to at least have that option preserved when we're done with that preventative maintenance project. So we're going to overbuild the road to possibly maybe widen that.
Temporary shoulders, right, Mark?
We're calling it temporary shoulders. We can call it a buffer area. We can call it whatever we want to call it. But that's part of our consultant scope, is to look at options like that. And then we may look at opening up another environmental document to get down to 128. as part of that. We don't have the funds to do that. But that would be in addition to the scope that we have now. But I understand what you're saying.
Thanks, Mark. Dave Watt, I'm a resident engineer, works with Mark Andrew for the I-25 Cimarron project. I'd like to talk about three things, budget and schedule, where we're at, some of the milestones we've recently completed, and some ongoing efforts and challenges, and start with the usual, which remains consistent and accurate, that we are within our budget and remain on schedule to complete the project by December 1st of 2017, so the end is near. Our recent milestones, I don't believe I was able to update we gave a prediction of this. We did open up the single-point urban interchange. We've now opened up the quadrant intersection in the southeast corner of 8th and US 24, and we are now on we've done a traffic shift about a month ago to where we have travel on each side of I-25 median. We're on the new bridge. So you're much on the alignment that you're going to see along I-25. Ongoing efforts, so I want to remind folks that we are under construction and we have some adjustments that we're working on with some of the signal timing. Hopefully some weather holds out tonight that we can put a number of video detection cameras at the single point urban interchange as well as up at 8th and the quadrant intersection. We have some adjustments that we need to do. We're witnessing some backups. I know the northbound exit ramp to go west is a bit of a problem child, and we're trying to time about 4 traffic signals there together, the two at either end of the quadrant, the US 24-8 intersection, as well as the single point urban interchange with the traffic light underneath there. I want you to know we are aware of those adjustments that are necessary, and there's a little bit of a balancing act that's underway. We're hoping that weather holds off tonight so that we can place some video detection cameras in the single point urban intersection and help our operations center, our traffic operations center folks have a better real-time eye on what's happening and make those adjustments accordingly. That's kind of where we're at with that. I would ask if there's any questions, or Mark, if I've missed anything, let me know.
I don't know.
I think your comment that if the weather holds off tonight was kind of a red flag, because I think the forecast is pretty grim on that respect.
Looks like about 9, 10 o'clock it might lighten up.
Lighten up.
This is going to be night work regardless of whenever the video detection cameras are installed.
Yeah.
And we would like to get them installed before the event tomorrow. And you will not see work on US 24 tomorrow by our folks anyway. That we'll have with the race event, with the bicycle race event.
Oh, yeah, that's
We're
right.
seeing
yeah.
the signs. The Bijou interchange will be closed during the day, and so we're going to have some more pressure on 24. And when that event's over, we're trying to be out of the way and hand it off to the Traffic Operations Center so we can get folks back home.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I did have one more comment with regard to ADA. If PPACG would like some help in defining what those goals or criteria might look like in terms of meeting standards or exceeding standards, we can help you with that language. I know we've had a similar discussion with our staff, not just meeting the standards, but taking other things into consideration like drainage. It's not just slapping in a handicap ramp. It's more than that. Does it function properly? Is the drainage there? Do you get ponding, which is creating your sanding effect? So those things that they come into the design part of it. So we've got a pretty in-depth training program at CDOT where we're trying to finish all of our ADA ramps within the next 4 years. We've got funding to do that. And so not only do we want to meet the standard, we want to make sure that the design is complementary to the conditions. So hope that helps. Probably a poor choice of words earlier on the I-25. What I was trying to say is that we don't have an EA or a planning level document, so we can't assume what that project's going to look like. But we want to make sure that any work that we do in that corridor takes into account that future possibility of widening. So it gets us a little further with the limited funds that we have. That's all I had.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if anybody's looking at eastbound 24 and 31st Street with the WAP project, with actually the Cimarron Road project. Been a tremendous increase in people trying to go left. And the signal has just changed to always be protected, basically. And just putting up a sign that says heavy left turn traffic is really not working tremendously well. It's a big safety issue. Don't know what the solution might be, but hopefully somebody working on one.
We are. We actually have plans in development right now for that project that'll go to advertisement for construction next spring. And we plan on extending that left turn lane and reconfiguring some of the signals to improve the sight distance through the intersection, which may allow us to lift that protected only phase. And then we're also looking at adding additional turn lanes at 21st Street as well. So those two projects receive some safety funding to address those accidents that we've been seeing. We also are looking at Ridge Road too, doing some improvements at Ridge Road as well. So those three projects, the 21st and 31st, certainly will be combined into one project, and we're maybe looking at adding improvements at Ridge Road as well at the same time.
Any way to just look at changing signal light timing and have maybe more left turn time or a second left turn time in the meantime? Because you're talking a year out, and summer notwithstanding, it's still a mess on a good weekend coming out of the mountains, even in April, believe it or not.
Well, part of the problem is we were having those accidents because of the poor sight distance across the intersection. And so that's why we made it protected only. So if we reverse it back to more permissive to allow that turn, that's going to help the backup on the left turn, but at the same time, it's going to possibly increase accidents for that left turning movement. So we've decided in the interim, the safest solution is what we have now. It's not the optimal solution at all, but it's the best solution until we get those left turn lanes extended.
I don't disagree with the protected left, because coming westbound, it's you never knew if somebody was going to pull out in front of you, and that is a relief actually going west. But similar to how northbound I-25 exit at Cimarron used to be, where it had basically two timings of left turn. If you could look at something like that, don't know if it's feasible with Colorado Avenue being so close.
And you know, I think Kathleen might be in the room, maybe she left, but she's looked at the timing to try to maximize that left turn movement. Kathleen, I don't know if, or Dave probably has an update.
Kathleen is not here. I can say that I know Kathleen is looking at, she's referred to this as an adaptive signal program along US 24, but there is another impact or effect on the US 24 corridor being the construction of the I-25 Cimarron interchange. So I know between that, the work on Colorado Avenue, we're seeing disrupted travel flows, and we're seeing a lot extra left turns and at 31st Street to try to avoid those areas, the avenue as well as the interchange.
So
things are going to add down a little bit when we get wrapped up here this fall, and hoping that's a draw to reduce those left turns that are folks going up to 30th Street and trying to get to Garden of the Gods. They'll pull to the interstate directly through the interchange and still make those adjustments and those project improvements that Mark was talking about earlier.
Nice. Here's hoping.
So hopefully a year and a half from now, we've got those intersections constructed. But like Dave said, when we finish Cimarron, we think we're going to have fewer cut-through traffic, if you will, because we've opened up Cimarron. So I think that'll help.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, seeing none. Member entity announcements. Does anyone have anything for the group? Yes, Trustee Smith.
I've got a meeting scheduled for officer from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office there with me. There will be other officers from various police officers or police organizations there as well. I've invited superintendents from various schools to be there, and I hope it'll be well attended. So I was taken on a drive by Sergeant Gerhardt, and it was interesting what I saw in the area around Calhoun. So the other thing I would add is that this Saturday and Sunday is Raven Days. So if you'd like to come out and join us, we'll have bouncy houses for the kids and tractor pull. That's all free. We do have raffles and things like this. There'll be a free dance. I can't remember the name of the band that's playing, but that's all free, and we have a good time. So come out to Raymond this weekend and enjoy yourself.
Thank you. Councilwoman Thompson?
I know it's hard to believe September will be here, but Labor Day, we have a big event in Fountain. We have a Fountain Fall Festival. We have a parade in the morning on Labor Day, and then a big event in Metcalf Park for the community. And if anybody would like to come down, love to have you.
1 week from this coming weekend, it's August 19th, is the Veterans Rally in Teller County. We expect between 5,000 and 6,000 motorcycles to rally in Woodland Park High School, departing at about 10 a.m., heading south down the POWMA Memorial Highway to Cripple Creek, convening for a 2-day rally in Cripple Creek. A number of speakers on schedule. We've got 104-year-old now Jim Downing, a survivor of the USS Pearl Harbor, will be one of our speakers at that event. Fort Carson and Peterson typically comes up, many active duty soldiers. So if you're a veteran or ride a bike, you're welcome to ride. Meeting in Woodland Park at, I think, beginning at 8 a.m. on the 19th. But please drive safely. There are lots of motorcycles going to be in the county a week from this coming Saturday. I don't ride a bike. You know, I'll be there speaking. I'll be giving the Teller County welcome to veterans from all over the country. We follow, by the way, Sturgis motorcycle event. So we get people from all over the country come to Teller County, and you're welcome to join us.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, with that, I'll invite everybody to be dry in the evening's rainfalls, and good luck. And we'll see you next week. We're adjourned. Next month, we're adjourned.
Glad you could